thank you again for being here. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sally Maxwell of Maxwell Coaching, an ACRA member business and a speaker extraordinaire. Thank you for being here, Sally. Take it away.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm really happy to be here speaking about one of my favorite things, communication. And before we dive in, I'll just give you a brief intro of, why I'm here, why I'm passionate about doing this, so that you can get a better understanding of where this is all coming from. So my husband and I actually run a relationship coaching practice that's been remote. We've been doing this for 15 years. And we started as generalist coaches, coaching businesses, coaching individuals in every area of their life. What we noticed is that it usually comes down to relationships. Whether it's romantic relationships, whether it's interpersonal relationships, whether it's relationships in the workplace, everything comes down to relationships. Specifically how we communicate, how we feel, what we think, what we need. And that was a catalyst for what drove Zach and me into focusing specifically on romantic relationships. So you'll see us in the paper writing a romantic relationship column. But today, I'm going back to my roots and really talking about the fundamentals of communication. And side note, if you are in a relationship, you can apply everything that we're learning today to that relationship, but you can also apply everything that you're learning today right to your interpersonal and also workplace relationships. So today we're talking specifically about the skills to navigate communication across generations in the workplace. Here's why generational communication is tricky. Right? I wrote it all out here. There are different communication styles and tools. Whether you are a boomer or Gen X or millennial, we all speak differently. Phrases that are used by a boomer are going to be interpreted differently by a Gen X. That doesn't necessarily mean that the communication is different. That means that the communication breakdown is different. So you can start to think about this like language translation. Right? If somebody who speaks French says something to you, but they don't quite get the phraseology of, American tongue, what they're going to say is going to come off differently to you. So there's a communication breakdown essentially that we're managing for. There are also varied values and expectations. There are stereotypes and misunderstandings. And then there's tech fluency gaps and tone misreads. So you see what I wrote here. It's not that people won't connect. It's that we're often speaking different cultural and emotional languages. Here's a chart illustrating how these generations tend to differ. So what you'll see over here represents the standard. And this is what Gen X, this is what the boomers learned and were trained in. And maybe they trained their kids in. The communication is more formal and structured. The values are direct, top down. It comes from the boss down. The tools are, we're going to use emails and meetings. That's it. And the concept, the relationship to work is that you're always on. How many people can relate with that, with having ever either experienced that personally or interfacing with somebody from that generation as any of these things? Raise your hand. Right, we all can. And then you have the younger generations, Millennials, Gen Z. There's more of a casual, brief digital tone. The feedback is more collaborative and it's more frequent, which could be difficult for a boomer to be giving frequent collaborative feedback to somebody who feels like they actually need it. That's an example of where the communication breakdown starts. And then there's work style. Right? The younger generations tend to value a work-life balance, whereas the older generations tend to value always being on. One is not better than the other. What matters is that there's a collective agreement inside of the organization and clear communication between what expectations are. So how do you achieve that? Well, we're going to get there. But this is just a good graph or a good table that shows some breakdowns of this. So the way that communication breaks down is, let's say a short message from a millennial or a Gen Zer, it could feel rude to one person, while it feels really efficient to another. Emojis They can feel unclear, or they can feel passive aggressive across generations. Some generations don't even know how to use emojis. My mom's a boomer, and she just learned how to use emojis, so now she'll send me like 49 emojis in one text message. And imagine working with somebody like that who then just discovers this new language, but then misuses it and misinterprets it. It suddenly becomes cumbersome, right? Unsolicited feedback, it can feel aggressive to some generations, or it can feel insufficient to others. So one group sees boundaries as healthy, and another group can see boundaries as disengaged. So you see how I'm illustrating the differences just in how we are raised generationally. And now we're all thrown into the workplace, and we are expected to harmoniously work together like where we speak one language, which we do. We all speak English, right? And we speak many other languages, but we're not speaking the same emotional communication language. So how do we bridge the gap? Mastering difficult conversations. So the reason I call this a mastering difficult conversations is because any conversation that is accompanied by difficult emotions can be classified as a difficult conversation. So a difficult emotion is something like fear, anxiety, apprehension, bracing yourself. Anything that falls under that umbrella, you can begin to classify as a difficult conversation. So ultimately what we're learning is how to communicate effectively through difficult conversations so that you feel seen, heard, and free to truly be yourself, and then also so the other person feels respected, and there's like a beautiful smooth current of communication between the two of you. Any questions so far? Okay, great. Now we're going to get into the logistics of how to do this. So this is a 7-step process that I teach all my coaching clients. And I'm going to teach it to you today. And step 1 is to schedule the conversation. So you're going to want to set up a time to speak with your partner together. Your partner is the person that you're speaking with. What this does is it avoids surprises or ambushes. Who likes to be surprised or ambushed with something intense? Not me, right? Like even when somebody comes to take blood, they're like, okay, the needle's coming. I'm gonna insert it now. Nobody's like jabbing that needle in and hoping that it goes well. So to avoid surprises or ambush, which obviously puts somebody on the defensive, you're going to want to set up the conversation. So for example, I want to discuss something important with you. Can we set a time to talk? It's nothing majorly wrong. I just want to speak about something that's important to me. It's important that you say that nothing's majorly wrong. I mean, of course, unless you're talking termination or something. But in most cases, there's not an end of the world issue. In most cases, it's a miscommunication, or it's a misalignment on a strategy or something that you are joining together to create. So you want to ensure the person, when you're talking to them, that listen, nothing's majorly wrong, and this is also important to me, so let's set a time to speak. So that's step 1, before the conversation even happens. Now, you're at the conversation. Begin by setting a positive frame. The reason you do this, the reason you lay this foundation, is to enroll the person who you're speaking with enroll them in your shared intention. So, for example, I'm having this conversation because I want to meet our sales objectives and ultimately feel successful at the end of the year. If you had a sales associate, who wouldn't want to be enrolled in that conversation? If you were saying that to a sales associate, another example is, I want to better understand your experience so we can be a more effective team. What you're doing by setting this positive frame is you are creating an ally. You're essentially getting the two of you on the same side of the table. There's a really great analogy that I use to teach this concept called the same side of the table, which is, imagine, I'll use the 3 of you since you're a team. Imagine if the 3 of you were sitting around each other and pointing at each other like you're the problem. A conversation doesn't get anywhere when you're pointing at the other person like they're the problem, right? Sales would be just better if you would just work harder. That never goes well. But if you can all sit on the same side of the table, metaphorically speaking, and imagine that the problem is right here in front of you, then you focus all of your energy at the problem instead of at one another. You become allies working together to solve the thing that is in front of you versus point fingers and assume that it's the other person. It never goes well when you assume that the other person has the problem. And part of being a leader, whether it's in a relationship, in a family, in a business, part of being a leader is assuming personal accountability for whatever outcome you're creating. And when you can get on the same side of the table as whoever you're working with, that shows that you're assuming responsibility, accountability for something that has to do with this problem, so that we can look at this problem together. And yes, we can both own accountabilities. We can both own what is contributing to this problem together so that we can solve the thing that's in front of us. Let's not take each other down while we're solving the problem. And that's what this first step does. You're setting that positive frame for the conversation. So moving on to step 2. By the way, if anybody has questions as I'm going, feel free to raise your hand, but I'll leave time at the end for questions as well with a summary of all of these steps. So you can even take a screenshot of the steps that I've laid out for you. But feel free to interrupt if you have questions. So the next step, share your vulnerability. This is not usually an easy thing to do for us, especially in the workplace, because we're taught that vulnerability is weak. Vulnerability can make you what? Vulnerable and susceptible to attack. Whereas I actually teach that vulnerability is a superpower. When we can leverage our vulnerability, we can create a culture where everybody operates from a place of honesty, truth, and vulnerability. And that is so much more functional than having, a team of 10 people who are guarded, thinking that they're going to be fired the next minute, or going to get in trouble, or going to do something wrong, or walking on eggshells. So if you're in a leadership position, or if you're not in a leadership position, leading with vulnerability is going to not only improve the quality of your life, but it's going to accelerate the trajectory of your career and improve the quality of connection on your team. So naming what you're nervous about, it dissolves the feeling usually. Part of the reason why we get nervous in conversations and then why we get tongue-tied and stuck in our throat is because we have this story in our head. Oh God, I'm really nervous to say this thing because I don't want to upset them and I don't want them to do a worse job. We have this fear in our head. We keep it in. And because we keep it in, it becomes true. Because we don't say it, it grows into this animal that we then have to navigate and negotiate around while we're having a conversation. So now we're managing this fear in our head while we're trying to speak coherently. This is part of the reason, it's part of the theory behind stage fright. Has anybody ever experienced stage fright? You get up in front of people, you can't speak because you're so in your head and freaked out about what everybody is going to think or what you're going to do that you actually lose your capacity to communicate effectively because you're stuck up here. So naming your vulnerability evaporates that. And again, difficult conversations feel scary because of big emotions like fear, anger, hurt feelings, feeling misunderstood. And when you name your vulnerability, it grounds you in your power and it grounds you in the true emotions. And again, it sets the tone, it sets the culture for the non-combative conversation. Right? How good would it feel if you were in a meeting with somebody and they said, you know what, off the bat, I just want to share with you a concern that I have in my head. I'm worried that if I communicate this, I'm going to offend you. And that is so not my intention. So these steps that I've outlined, 1, 2, 3 to the beginning, lay the foundation. You're building the foundation. Thank you. You're building the foundation. And that foundation, just like a foundation is important in a home, that foundation creates the stability that the conversation needs in order to thrive. So moving on to the next step, owning your part. This is really the last step in building the strong foundation of a conversation, and I'm circling back to our old friend accountability here. Accountability never goes out of style. Owning your own part is really about avoiding pointing fingers and blaming. You're going to want to find out how you contributed to the dynamic that is causing the conflict. So anytime, think about this, anytime there's a conflict with another person, or somebody is not delivering what they said that they would, anytime there's an experience of you not getting what you want, it is the result of a dynamic. It is the result of two people doing their human thing together, being imperfectly perfect humans, and doing their best to communicate, and inevitably, something gets lost in translation, something gets miscommunicated because somebody's too scared to say something or ask for what they need or advocate for themselves. Anytime you don't get what you want, assume that it's because of a dynamic between you and another person or you and a group of people. And what this does is it actually gives you your power back. It actually allows you to access the lesson that you need to learn in that moment so that you can leverage your power and feel like you have control of this situation again. Feel like you're not necessarily a victim to this outcome that you don't like anymore. Feel like you have some authority over your life. And the way that you access that authority is by assuming your accountability. Now here's the thing, accountability is never 50-50. Sometimes it's like 90% one person's actions and thoughts. Sometimes it's just 10% another person's actions and thoughts. Sometimes it's 60-40, sometimes it's 99% 1%. But I promise you, even if your accountability in a negative dynamic that you're experiencing is just 1%, if you can find that 1%, it's going to revolutionize the conversation. I'll give you an example. Before running my own coaching practice, I ran a international life coaching company based in New York, and I was responsible for the performance of all of the coaches there. And there was one coach who just wasn't showing up and performing well. And I couldn't quite figure out why. And I kept, my monkey mind went to, well, she's, just being tricky. She's just being a pain in the butt. Maybe she doesn't want to be here. Maybe she just really needs to get fired. Like, that's where my monkey mind went. My unevolved mind went. And that's where most of our minds go. But luckily, because of my training, I caught myself and I said, whoa, Sally, where can you be accountable in this dynamic? And I paused for a moment and I recognized that I had not given her crystal clear benchmarks to which she could win and excel at. I had given her a general year plan with general objectives, plans that had worked for different coaches who were a little bit more structured and a little bit more self-motivated. I had given her a similar type of plan. I didn't actually tune into who she was as a human being and what she needed. She was more of an artistic, free-flowing person who actually thrived under structure. And in getting to understand this and know this about her, I was able to flip the mirror back on me and say, whoa, I missed a really big one at the beginning of the year with her. And I didn't give her the structure that she actually needed to win. So I called a meeting with her, and I started the meeting by following all these steps, but getting to the owning my part. And I really acknowledged, I said, listen, as your boss, I didn't do my job well. And I really see that, and I apologize for that, and I acknowledge that. And you're not in trouble here. This is truly a collaboration. And what I see is that, from my perspective, you need some more structure. and you need more specific and measurable goals to help you win. How would that feel? And I still remember she just softened. She just said, thank you so much. And you're right. And I do want structure. And you know what? I can be accountable for not coming to you and saying what I needed, because I'm a big girl, too. And it opened up a solution-oriented conversation between the two of us, because I was able to start by owning my point and didn't just come into the meeting hot and say, listen, you are not meeting your objectives. You're letting, that never works. So, owning your part, it creates a safe space for resolution. It builds credibility and models accountability. So what I mean by it builds credibility is, if you're able to own your part in this dynamic, it shows to the other person that you are introspective, you're self-aware, you take time to look at yourself and how you're performing, you don't necessarily assume the worst of other people, you're a credible person. And it builds that credibility for you when you bring it to the conversation. And again, models accountability, which is something we all want from everyone who we work with, right? So that is owning your part. Now, we've built the foundation of the conversation. Now we get to the point of sharing the thing. This is why we're all here, right? We want to share the thing. We want to talk about the difficult thing. We want to talk about the conflict. We want to talk about the breakdown of communication. We want to talk about the misunderstanding. We want to talk about the thing that's bothering us. Notice how I say share your concern with curiosity. The curiosity is the magic ingredient, because what you're doing is you're not assuming that your interpretation of the story is the truth. You communicate your concern without assuming that full story. Because we all know there's never like one black and white truth. There are interpretations and variations of all stories, and the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So for example, when you said XYZ, I felt XYZ. How did you see that moment? So let's say I was to say this to my mom. Mom, when you texted me 49 emojis, I felt confused. How did you see that moment? What were you trying to communicate? Or, I feel like I usually deal with this specific issue in the workplace. What's your experience? It could be, I feel like I'm regularly responding to sales inquiries and complaints. What's your experience? Do you feel like you're regularly attending to those, or do you feel like you're, doing something else? And the important thing here is to get really specific, but not assume that your story or your concern is the black and white truth. You really want to get curious about what the other person's experience is, because you have something to learn here. Another hot tip that I did not include on this slide is avoid using extremes. Never, always, every time, every day. When you use extremes in communication, it sets you up to be wrong, because nothing is ever always. It might be 99% of the time, but it's never always. And it sets you up to be incorrect in light of the other person. Because put yourself in their shoes. If I say to you, you're always late, your mind goes to, well, no, I'm not. I was on time 3 Tuesdays ago. What are you talking about? Dummy, right? Like, that's how south the conversation can go when we use these extremes. Always, every day, every time. And side note, in intimate relationships, this happens all the time. And this is why people fight so much in intimate relationships, because somebody comes to them and they say, you never take me out on a date. You never initiate. I always do the dishes. And then it becomes a tit for tat. So avoid using extremes in general. If you can train yourself out of using extremes in life, I would say that would be a worthy thing to take on, right? Just like when many of us graduate college, like I did, I trained myself out of saying like every sentence. You might catch me saying it a couple times, but I worked really hard to train myself out of saying like. we can train ourselves to avoid using extremes in the name of great communication. So now you've shared your concern and you've asked them, what do you think? Now this arguably is the hardest part of the conversation. It's the listen and reflect, okay? Or the way I crassly say it with some of my clients, shut up and listen. Just zip it. Remind yourself, just really try. You wanna let your partner respond without interpreting or fact checking. You want to give them the same dignity and respect that they gave you when you just shared your concern and you just laid out this whole foundation. And then this is the black belt move. Repeat back to them what you heard to confirm the understanding. This is truly a communication black belt strategy. When you can repeat back to somebody what they've said, it does several things. Number one, it makes the other person feel heard and communicates that to them so that there's no doubt in their mind that they're being understood. And number two, it's an exercise, it's a listening exercise for you to ensure that you understood them, and it's an empathy exercise for you to put yourself in their shoes, human to human, and just wonder, what must it feel like to be them for a moment? So it actually opens up your heart. It opens up this center of empathy, which is an ingredient necessary for collaboration. And see, modeling this behavior reduces defensiveness and it encourages collaboration. So if you can model this behavior in the workplace, you're going to elevate the culture through which you communicate, through which your team communicates. Just by doing this, people will catch on. They'll have a conversation with you and say, wow, that felt really good. I really liked when they said back to me what I said. I'm gonna start doing that. And that's how it happens. It spreads in a good way. And that is the listen and reflect. Now here is the last step. Most people never do this step. Most people have a great conversation full of all the right intentions. Everybody shared their thoughts, but we forget to create new agreements. The new agreements are what is necessary in order for the dynamic to change. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna collaborate and create new agreements together. For example, I promise to communicate with you if I have an issue within one workday. Now that's pretty radical. Let's say you have you and one other person who you work with, and you both make a promise, a 24-hour grumble policy, where you both promise to communicate an upset or a misunderstanding or a grumble within 24 hours. That's very radical. And what it will do is it will eliminate buildup of misunderstanding and resentment. It takes courage to do this. It's very vulnerable to do this. And it's transformative. Can you please knock before entering? It's pretty simple, right? Like you might have a millennial who, is super comfortable walking in and saying, "Hey everybody, what's up? I'm ready for our meeting." And then you might have a boomer who says, "Whoa, whoa, 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 that was so disrespectful." You can create an agreement between each other so that nothing gets lost in translation between that communication. Can you knock before entering? Or we'll promise to have a 15-minute weekly huddle to discuss this matter. Oftentimes what I see in teams and in the workplace is that things can get sloppy really quickly if you don't have regularly occurring meetings in place to address specific recurring issues. Things that need ongoing maintenance, projects that need ongoing maintenance. And it can even be something, I promise to keep this line item on our monthly agenda so that we touch base on it every month. I promise to not lose sight of this. But when you notice how specific and measurable these are not, well, I'll try to do better. I'll try harder. I'll be a better communicator. Those are all really nice intentions, but nice intentions don't create results. Specific and measurable actions create results. I'm gonna say that one more time because it's really important. Intentions do not create results. Well, I really intend to get in shape. I'm going to try really hard to get in shape this month. I'm going to try really hard to not snap at my partner this month. I'm going to try really hard to show up at work on time. I'm going to try really hard to act professional. What is that? What does any of that mean? You can't measure it. And trying actually sets us up to feel like a failure in our life because we actually don't have a benchmark that we're achieving. You can try forever and not feel like you've succeeded, right? How many people do you know in your life who try at something, and even if they're great at it, they're still trying, and they just feel like they're never a success? It's painful, right? So this is why specificity around your actions matter. So these are the agreements that you're creating. And that's how you wrap up the conversation. Now, I have created something that you guys can take a little screenshot of if you want a quick cheat sheet. I would recommend taking a picture of this, making it a star favorite on your phone so that you can pull it up anytime. I use this framework for difficult conversations almost daily. I use it now. I've been using it for 15 years, and I do it so short-handedly that I don't even notice that I'm doing it anymore because it's so ingrained in my vernacular. My husband and I will have a difficult conversation in the kitchen in 2 minutes, but we will follow this structure, and it always goes well. Any questions before I move on? Take your pictures. So here are some important reminders. Don't believe that there's no point because past conversations have failed. This is something that I hear all the time. Well, Sally, there's no point in trying to have the conversation because I know how it's going to go anyway. This is actually just fear trying to give you an excuse to not have the conversation. And while you may have data and experience that can support your theory that the conversation might not go well, I'll tell you this, I have lost track the number of times that somebody has told me this, and then they use the format that I just taught, and they come back and they say, oh my gosh, it went so differently, right? It went so differently. The reason it went differently is because they used a structure that generates respect and accountability and team building. They didn't just come in hot, accusatory, pointing fingers and say, why didn't it go well? Right? So never believe that there's no point. Fear can stop you from trying again. So that whole story that, well, I've tried so many times, what's the point of trying? That is just fear talking to you. Fear of confrontation, fear of having to have the conversation, fear of upsetting your employee or somebody who you work with, fear of making a mess. We're scared of all sorts of things as human beings. And it's usually just fear. But it is so necessary for growth. Because when you have these difficult conversations, every time you have one, you grow. You grow. Maybe you grow by being more accountable. Maybe you grow by learning how to be more vulnerable. Maybe you grow by learning how to be more collaborative. Maybe you grow by learning from the other person. But you grow. And aren't we all on this planet to grow a little better? So that's why you have these conversations. And with that, if you have any questions, please email me. You can visit our website, but you can feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. If you feel compelled to discuss working one-on-one together, I'm happy to do that as well. But just know that I'm here as a community member to support and lift us all up so that we can all grow and be the best versions of ourselves and the best versions of our organization and truly thrive together. Now, I will open it up to questions, but before I do, I want to thank Aspen Chamber for sponsoring this event so that we can all learn and grow together. Thank you, GrassRoots TV Media, for being here and capturing this so that people can watch it in perpetuity. And again, my name is Sally Maxwell with Maxwell Coaching. It's a total pleasure to be here and grow with you.